yesterday we have, I spoke about literal. So now let's see what is literal. A value that we are going to, for example, in here, assign it to a variable, we call it literal, right? Or integer literal. Like for example, in here, number 5. Or if I have another example that you can see in here, apple is the variable and 20 is the integer literal. So don't get confused. Also, the name might be new for you. Just simply the number that I assign to a variable is called integer literal. Next, let me just talk about a string. Since not only numbers can be literal, a string could be literal as well. For example, in here, I'm going to leave a comment. 5 is an integer literal. In here, I'm going to leave a comment. Let me minimize. The number, which is just as a statement in here, is a string literal. That's the difference. So any text, word, a statement inside this quotation is called a string literal, and any number being assigned to a variable is called integer literal. Next, identifier. Remember, I said that we always have to just include definitely your directive. IOStream is a directive. This is your directive. Now, inside that directive, we do have a lot of information, including all of the syntaxes, all of this, like maybe characters, all of the keywords. Now, some of them are listed down right inside this table. For example, and. For example, what we just used. We used some data type integer, or data type maybe I have another one, bool, integer, character, which we call it char. These are all information or keywords that are included inside directive. So this is just for your reference. You can just look at this one later. Variable name is exactly like number. In here, I use number. In here, another example, item orders, or maybe apple, or maybe fruit. Variable is something that you can customize it. The only variable that you cannot customize is main. Main must remain as it is, but any other variable, you can change it. Identifier means anything that you are going to just put it inside the parentheses. So for example, in here, if later you are going to define another function, you can include information, but inside the main, you have to leave it empty, nothing more. Some of the information must remain always lowercase. You are not allowed to change them to uppercase. That's another thing about the identifier. Like, for example, let's review some of them as an maybe quick assessment to remember. In here, one identifier such as total sales by itself, this is just a variable. Is this valid? Yes, this is correct because it's total sale without any, for example, dot or any certain identifier. Remember in here I said, look at here, you have to not to include. So you have to put some character, some alphabetic, but you couldn't like have back to back, maybe a comma or dot or something like that. So for example, if you mention dot in between the two words, it doesn't work. It's not valid. If you have maybe some number at the beginning, it doesn't work. Always it must start with lowercase. You can have uppercase at the middle. You can have underscore at the middle, but you cannot have dot at the middle. You cannot have number at the beginning. You cannot have dollar sign at the end. These are something wrong. But anything like, for example, underscore at the middle or having capital at the middle is fine, but not at the beginning. So these are some examples. Data type, I already introduced integer. So integer is a data type. This is one thing. but some more that we are going to use, like for example, short, unsigned short. What's the difference between these two? If I use only short, remember yesterday I talked about the memory and how much of the space in the memory is occupied with the information. This is a good thing to learn right now. If I use the data type, this is a data type. If I use data type short, this is only 2 bytes in terms of size. And not only 2 bytes, it's going to be in the range of, as you can see right in here, in the range of minus 32 to plus 32K. Okay, so this is the size. But if I am using unsigned short is going to occupy less amount of the memory. So it's better to use unsigned short if we know how much space we need for that certain task. Because this is going to, for example, have like 0 to 65, right? But integer and unsigned integer, same. Also, both of them are 4 byte, but their range is different. Range in integer is going to be from minus 2 to plus 2. Range in unsigned integer is 0 to 4 something. That's the difference. So only between the sizes, you are dealing with different sizes. That's the only difference. Another data type is long. So you are learning short, integer, long. So all of this are going to be used for numbers only, not for a string, or let's say not for characters. If you are playing with numbers such as here 5, then you need to assign the data type integer to the variable. In order to define any variable, you must assign the type of variable. So I'm going to use variable number. Therefore, I have to say what is this number. This number is character. This number is digit. Or let's say even not number. Let's say a variable. I'm defining a variable. Here, I define a variable. But in order to define a variable, first I have to identify or define the data type for the variable, then the actual variable. So first data type plus the variable name. So that data type could be something which is a function of what I am going to create. Here I'm going to create a number, therefore I have to use integer. If I'm going to create, for example, a character, then I have to use char. Char is another data type for a character, or I have to use a string. It depends, right? So another example in here, for example, I'm going to create a variable, call it length. So I assign integer. Width is again number. So I assign integer. But if I don't know how much space, in here I know I need only one number. Let's say, for example, my length is 7 centimeter. For width, for example, is only 5 centimeter. Therefore, I know it's only one number. But there are situations that I don't know how much space I need in order for the processor to process it. Then I have to use unsigned integer. For example, in here, I'm going to calculate area. Since area for different number might be like product of two big number, and it is going to occupy a huge space of my memory, therefore I say unsigned integer, right? And if you want it to, for example, to be on the same line, you can see there are two methods. Let me practice this. Suppose that you have two variables, one of them is number. I have another variable right in here is, for example, number 1. I have 2, for example. Either I can define them in two different lines, or I can define them in the same line, or I can say integer, because both of them, the data type is same data type. And I can do this for only the situation that my data types are the same. So I can say number, comma, number 1. Now, if one of this is following, so this is the second method for these two. If one of them is following a different data type, I cannot put them on the same line. If, for example, another one is char, name, for example, I cannot say integer number char name on the same line. I cannot have two different type of data type. It must be same data type to be able to put it on the same line. That's what we are seeing in here. Now let's look at this example. For example, I do have integer check-in, unsigned integer mile, and long is day. The difference between these three data type, this is one data type, this is another unsigned int, and long is another. Difference between them is only the size. And usually we don't too much maybe focus on this just for the lining purpose, since we are using just simple task. But later when you are going to become advanced and expert in the field and just program complicated task and project, definitely you have to just be careful about which kind of data type you use, because each of them is going to occupy different amount of your RAM. So let's look at another example, like for example, example 210. Example 210, I'm gonna just debug this one for you. In this example, first, I'm gonna show few literal, integer literal. Remember I said integer literal is any numbers that it is assigned to a variable, like -20, like 4,276, like 189,000, and many more. So these are my integer literal. In this program, I'm going to have several integer types, and I am going to see out each of them separately. Like for example, I'm going to see out miles, check-in, and days. Pay attention. This is exactly similar a structure of creating a simple program. So in the lab, I'm gonna for a second go back to the lab question. Look at here, for example, lab question is asking you create a program that assign value for variable that hold data from first name, age, hourly. First name, I just said, is character. Therefore, for character, you cannot, if you are asked to create like for first name, you cannot for first name use integer for first name, then you have to use char. For age, age is number. For age, you have to use integer. Hourly also you can use integer. So wage is integer. Gender is still char, character. So pay attention. Different type of information needs different type of data type. So for example, in lab 1, first question, you need first name. So first name is char. You need age. This is integer. And you need hourly wage. This is also hourly wage is integer. No, hourly wage in this example, since it has dot, it couldn't be integer. It should be double. Double is another data type. Anytime we have only one integer, we can use int, like for example, 5. But if we have 5.3, we cannot use integer. We have to use double. Now let's go back and practice them. So in this example, I'm using integer for check-in because check-in doesn't have any actually like decimal point. Mile and days, none of them they do have decimal points. So either I can use integer for all of them, but for the like sake of practice, I use long and unsigned integer for the other one. Let's debug and see what's the output. So as you can see on my screen, exactly as mentioned in here, we have made a long journey of mile. Mile is 4,276. So we have made a journey of this mile. And then our check-in, anything in here will be printed right in here up to is. and then it will go read the check-in. Check-in is -20, so -20 will be printed right in front of it. It will print out any notes in here about, but since after about I put the day in the middle, right in here, then it will pause. After about, it will go read day about 189,000 something days ago. Columns stood on this spot. So this is how we can print out some information, how we can define some variables with different data type, and then define what that data type is, assign some literal or let's say integer literals to them, or in some cases assign character, assign a string, and so on. I'm gonna pause at this point, give you a break. Meanwhile, I'm gonna take care of any of your question. So it's 1 hour from the class. Let's have like 6 minutes of break. Anyone who needs my attention, let me know. So far we have discussed integer. Now I'm gonna, and also I have practiced character or char with you. Let me continue with more example in there. So there are situations that we are going to use some letters or some maybe let's say even just one single alphabet. In that situation, as you can see right in here, let's say I'm going to say char and I'm going to say letter. Instead of using data type integer, I simply use data type char, standing for character. Now, since I already defined once again, anytime that I use a data type plus a variable name, I simply means I am defining a new variable. This is the process of definition of any new variable. I need a data type and I need a variable name. That variable name is your option, but the data type should be a match proper data type with the project that you are going to work on it. Here, I'm going to define a letter. Now I would say letter, and I'm assigning it single quotation. Anytime that I am going to just assign a character to a variable, which is a type of character variable, I enclose it inside the single quotation. In here, let's say C. So that's the difference. If I am going to print out something like here or here, I enclose it inside double quotation. If I am printing, if I am just assigning a character to a variable, which is already a character type or chart, then I use single quotation, right? So this is how we define a character. Letter A, letter I use letter C or whatever. Now let me just debug a code with similar information for you. For example, I'm defining letter, I assign A and I assign B. So I define two letters and I'm going to debug and see what's the expectation. Therefore, program output should be A and B. My display is coming up. Maybe there is some bug. I'm going to do it again. Yeah, here we go. I'm going to maximize for you to see the letter A and B. Just pay attention, quickly review how I do it first. I use hash include iostream, then I use using name. Keep it in mind. This is a template for every other project that you are working on it. First, hash include iostream, then using namespace std. You will learn it by heart gradually, but at least have it in your mind that there are requirements that I have to start with. Start with hash include iostream, then add using namespace, and then start defining the first line of main function, open the curly bracket, and then start defining any information or the body of that certain function. In here, I'm defining one character to become assigned to A, and I'm defining another letter for the same character. So one time I want to print out, I define only one variable, pay attention, one variable as a letter, but that letter I want it to first be A, later I'll change it to B. Even I can add more. For example, I can say then letter be assigned to single quotation C and then semicolon and then C out shift letter shift either endl or endl. And then if I print out now, instead of having only A and B, the same letter, next time is C right underneath. Let's do that. It should just include even C as well, A, B, C. So just keep it in mind and practice the same thing for lab 1. Next, this is the same thing I already said. Either you can use like in here and L, or you can use \n to move to the next line. Now character a string. Let's say for example in here, any character between like the quotation mark is gonna be considered 0. Simply means that's not going to be in the debugging process. Or we call it null terminator. Anytime that we have nothing in here, it's a 0. Computer by default will assign 0 to any of the remaining bits. This is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is a 6-bit. 6-bit. And then since one of them is empty, by default, there's no character in here, then 0 will be assigned to here. That's not your job. Computer will do it automatically. So now let's just together practice one simple example about demoing some string class, because so far we learned how to have only iOS stream. Now let's practice adding hash include. Do it with me. Hash include open, and then remember I said in order to use character I have to use a string, not char. Char is okay. Char is a part of iOS stream. You don't need to use the directive or add the directive a string. But if you are going to use the string as data type, then you have to add the directive a string, right? And then now in here, I'm gonna just go ahead and edit the body of my function. This time I'm going to use a string as a variable. A string is a variable, but it's included in the directive a string. So I would say a string, and I'm going to give it a name. For example, movie, a string movie. I'm going to maybe look at some movie title, and I'll close it with semicolon. Next, I'm going to say what is that movie? Maybe movie title or movie name, let's say. Movie name. Now I'm going to say what is my movie name? Movie. One thing that I really think this is mandatory for you to consider it. Whenever you are defining a variable, exactly the way that you define it very first time, you must keep repeating it as it is. If you have it started with lowercase, it must be with lowercase. If you have it with upper, it must be repeated over and over. Otherwise, computer cannot, or CPU cannot understand what you are talking about. So for example, in here, I started movie as a variable with lowercase m. Now in here, if I say uppercase M, it's not gonna be recognized. That's why it is underlined red. Anything with underlined red means there is some error. Therefore, I must make sure I have to redefine it exactly the way that I did it the very first time. Actually, I'm not redefining, I'm reusing. First, I define. The way that I define it, I must use it with the same format. So movie name, I'm gonna assign it to, I'm gonna open my, and I'm gonna give it the name. Let's say Wheels of Funny. Wheels of fairy, or maybe anything. Just a name, just a string. And then look at here. Why do I have underlined red for return 0 while it is correct? This underlined red is reminding me that I have to include semicolon in here. As soon as I add a semicolon, that will be gone automatically. You have nothing to do. So now I have already defined some string. I gave the variable name movie name, then I defined the movie name, Fairy or whatever. And then I'm going to see out. How do I see out? I say see out. And then I say whatever name that I have. I can use the same one, or I can say print out my best movie, right? And then what is that my best movie? Since I already have the name, I say go read it from movie name. And then I would say and L, and I must include semicolon. Simple, simple. Now, if I debug, it must give me my best movie, Wheels of Fairy, all together in a single line. Let me see if I can get it. Yes, my best movie, Wheels of Fairy, right? Now, if I want some space in here, see, look at here, how everything is just attached. I have to come here, add some space. Maybe even I want to say is, and then keep some space. Then these two words are not going to be like back to back and sticking and like making a messy look. Then I'm going to debug again. Then it's going to be my best movie is movie name. Movie name is Walls of Fairy, so it's gonna be my best movie is Walls of Fairy. And look at here, now I do have some space and I can read it clearly. Guys, any questions so far? Why do we do include the string? Because I am, somebody is asking why I included hash include a string. Because I was planning to use the data type a string. Data type a string is not included in directive IO stream. IO stream can just include, it has like some of other data types, but it doesn't have the data type a string. A string is only in a string. Therefore, I have to first call that directory, or let's say that header file. Then I can get access to a string. Now, for example, if I comment this one, means if I deactivate it, a string won't be considered anymore. If I just go ahead, then I cannot. This is still on the previous screen. So in order to use it, let me refresh. Yeah, I explained the C outline as well. See, my best movie is, and this one is a string, so I have to include a string. That's the reason. In here also I mentioned it. For a string class, we need to add the hash include a string. And someone else is asking, can you explain the cout line? Yes. In order to see out any information on the console, we have to first use cout, means output. Output whatever message that you want. This is your option. And then since I already have some variable and I want the information of that variable to be printed in front of this one, then I have to call the variable and then endl. Is this answering your question? If not, ask me a bit more detail and I'll help you that way. Is that enough, or you need more information about the C outline? And L is end of line, means move to the beginning of next line. Either you can use end L or you can use \n. In order to move the print out, we practice it. Later you may want to go back. and watch the recording again. Either you can use and L in order to move to the next line, or you can use backslash n. Either of them will work. I'm getting an error trying to debug this one. So then you have to tell me what, look at here, somebody, if you are getting error, look at just the bottom of your screen, click on it and see what the error is. Make sure you have all of the semicolons. If all the semicolons are included, make sure that your directory is included, and make sure, for example, you are not missing parentheses or you are not missing any of the brackets. These are the things that you need to check in order to make sure things are working. So, more? Anything more? Next, we are going to practice a couple of more data type, because remember I said we have many different data type for different applications. We already practice integer, we practice char, standing for character, we practice a string, and now we are going to practice float, double, and long double. What's the difference between them? Remember I said in any scenario or situation that instead of only having a single simple integer, you are going to have some decimal point, then you cannot in any number, for example, like 2.3 is a number, but it's not an integer because you do have some decimal point. Therefore, you have to use double, not integer anymore. Anytime you are using dot and you have decimal point, you have to use the data type double. Now, there are scenarios you may say, I don't know I'm going to have decimal point or not. Which one I have to use? Should I use integer or I have to use double? In that cases, stay safe, use double. Double include both integer and decimal point, but integer is only integer. Make sense? So now, let's, how about float? There are situations that you are going to still have some decimal point, like for example, what I have in here, 31.4159 or so. So if the number or the point is like fixed, then we can use it like this. But there are situations it's not, like here, right? So then we have to force to be float. In that situation, we have to make it a float, not only double. That's the thing. Now let's practice it as an example to see how it works. In here, I'm defining my program to use only IOStream. I don't need a string since I'm not using the data type string. If I'm using data type string, definitely I have to hash include the string, should be here. And then I'm using two different data type. This time I'm gonna practice using float for the distance because this one is like into the power of something, therefore it cannot be double. And I'm using mass as well. So mass is double, float is like for the distance. Backslash n in here is just because I want these two lines to be printed back to back, not on the same line. Either I can use backslash n or I can use and l, as I just said in the previous example. So if I debug this code, it should give me the sun is, then reading the distance, and distance is this number. The sun is distance, which is this number, meters away. And then since I do have backslash n being added right in here, that's why this line is not on this printed on the same line. It's moved to the second line. Then I have the sun's mass is gonna be taken from here, 1.9 something kilograms, and this is the way that we are using float. Distance floats as a data type double is a data type, definitely method of definition of every single data type is the same. First, we use the data type regardless of it is integer, char, a string, float, double, or any other data type. First, we use the data type, then we give it a variable name. Data type is a keyword. We cannot customize it. As it must be as it is, but any of these keywords for the this variables is your option to choose how you want to write it, what you want to write. This is totally your option. So far, we learned about any time that we are going to have some floating point or we are going to have some decimal points. Now let's practice another data type, Boolean. Bool, if you have this idea from any other maybe sources, is in a situation that we are going to look at the validity of maybe a subject, maybe a question. We are going to check if that question is correct or it is wrong. We are going to check if that statement is true or it is false. In any of the situation that we have a conditional statement, which might be either 0 or 1, true or false, on or off, then we can use the data type bool, standing for Boolean, right? So Boolean is going to check 0 or 1, off or on, true or false. So it's a data type which is going to just be added, for example, instead of double or instead of float. Let's put it into one example, like for example, 217, how to use Boolean. Everything else is the same. I'm gonna do it exactly the same way. I start with IOStream, then namespace. All it is difference is just a bool as a data type. I write bool, I give it a variable name, and then I have to define my variable as true or false. One time I want it to be true, the other time I want it to be false. I added again and else since I want the result to be printed in two different lines. In here, if it is true, true always will be printed on the console as number 1. If it is false, it's gonna be printed as 0. So true or 1 or on, false or 0 or off, right? So now let's just debug. It should give me 1 and 0 for the first one, 1 for the second one, 0, like this. Next is going to be how to look at the size of any object or any variable. In order to do so, first I have to define that variable the way we did so far. For example, I'm going to look at a variable named amount. And since amount is something unknown, I don't know it's an integer or it might come with some decimal, therefore I use double. So I'm going to say, let me just practice this with you. I'm going to say double amount. I must close it with semicolon. And now I have to say cout that number or that value or that size or whatever as amount. Let's say I'm going to make it short for the sake of time. Cout double is, and go get the size, whatever the size of. So then I use size of. This is a keyword. So I have to say size of. Then how do I know it's a keyword if it's the first time I use it? As soon as I see the color is changing from black to blue, therefore I know that, oh, okay, this is not something unknown. It's not a variable which might be my own customized variable. It's already in the library. That's why the color is changing to blue. Then I have to say parentheses. Then since I use double, as a data type in here, I have to use double again. And then I'm gonna use shift again. And since I may need some more extra information, maybe size in the unit byte, or you can even ignore this part. Bytes. I'm missing B bytes. So, and then insert another one. One thing that something is wrong in here. My keypad is just cleaning up everything. Let me fix it. Okay. Right, now it is fixed. And now I have two options in order to move to the next line, either inside, right in here, I have to mention \n, or I can just out of it use endl. Either of them will be correct. So now I'm gonna go just print out size of double, right? Or I can say size of amount. Let's just debug. Double is 8 byte. How do I know double 8 byte? Because double is something known inside the library, so it is going and reading it from the library or directive and knows that double is 8 byte. It's an 8 byte data type. So next I'm gonna just look at some variables. How do I assign them? I already said if I have like maybe amount in here, and next I'm gonna say what is amount, then I should use exactly the same variable the way I typed it as definition, assign it to a number. We practice it in other examples. I just repeat it to make sure you know how to give it some number. Then, for example, I'm going to look at another program having multiple number, which is going to be right in here. How do I include multiple number? If I have multiple numbers, then and all of them are integer, then I can simply put them in the same line. Either I have to put them in the same line, or I can do int days assigned to 28 in a different line and then remove this one. So either of these two methods is correct. Since both of them are integer, it's much easier to include both of them in the single line instead of having two lines. But technically, both methods are doing the exact same job. And now all I want to print out the month and the day. So I'm going to say month has 2 days, or something like a month 2 has 28 days. Let's read it together. It should be month 2 has 28 day. Let's see. Yep. At this point, I'm gonna wait for you. In case you have any question, feel free to ask before I add more information. Anything? Everyone clear? Everyone following? Yeah? Okay. So I have a little bit more to add. A scope of variable is a part of your code which is going to use some variable, because if I'm using defining a variable, I must give it some more information, right? Which we call it a scope of a variable. Like for example, in here, I defined month and then I said, okay, variable is a variable month, but the information for that variable is 2, right? Month 2. or I define days, then I say information or a scope of it is 28. Same in this example. In this example, I say, first I define value as a variable, then I give it some information, and then I have to see out. That simply means I cannot first say see out. If I just move this one to before this, then there is no scope for this variable, because month is a variable. I have to have a scope of that. A scope of variable means definition of that variable must be before asking from console to print it out, because console will start taking care of the lines one by one in order. If it is coming and touching months and days in here, since these two are variables and are not known for the computer, I must give them some scope. I must define them. That's why I cannot have that request before defining them. That's what we call it, a scope of variable. We already discussed some arithmetic and, let's say, mathematical operation yesterday and during the introduction, which is lecture 1 or chapter 1. And now we are going to practice some of them. For example, if we are going to add two numbers, simply what we do in math, we use plus. We do the addition signs, same as regular mathematical process. If we are subtracting, we do the same. We use subtraction. If we are doing the multiplication, we can use a star or asterisk. Or if you are doing division, just a division sign. These parts, all of them are exactly the way that we are using in the regular mathematics. Now, to make it understandable for you, let me put them in one example and debug. Like, for example, I'm having a base pay rate with some number, regular hours, overtime wage, overtime pay rate. Guys, this is very helpful for you. Look at here, that's very similar to what I'm asking you to do in lab 1. So if you learn it in here, you can simply do your lab 1 properly and easily. You are not going to be asked to do anything which you are blank about it. I always give you enough practice, enough information, then I'll get you to go practice it inside the lab as an assessment. So in order to calculate the regular wage for somebody, I have to define different variables in here, like base pay rate, regular hours, overtime wage, pay rate, overtime hours, and so on. So now I'm going to use some mathematical operation. It's easy. Since I'm going to calculate the regular wage, I already know that the regular wage is going to be like the base pay rate times the regular hour. If I have some product of these two number, which is the base pay rate times for how many hours you worked, then you can calculate the regular. How do I write it down for the machine to be understandable? First, I must define the data type. I must be sure that if I am having any decimal point, I cannot use integer. I must use double. So use double, give it a variable name, and for calculation of regular wage or overtime wage or total wage, figure it out what kind of numbers you need. Give it another name, like for example in here, my base pay rate is this, regular pay rate is this, and so on. Guys, in fact, these are all same line. It's not like one of them has the data type but not the other. So they are all double. They are all back to back, but I printed them like that because I want you to see everything. Let me just put them. So they are all in the same line and they are all following just the same double. Either you can keep repeating double for each of them, or you can just put them back to back. But since it might not be visible, I push them down for you. It's like that. So you cannot define any variable without data type. You must include a data type, okay? So this is mandatory to include data type. Either repeat it over and over for every single one, like double regular wage, double base pay rate, and so on, or use one time since all of them are following double, then add others and continue like that. So now let me just debug. So this is simple mathematical process. Just use multiplication or addition or subtraction or maybe division based on the question. So now I was asked to only see out the wage for this week only, not others. If you want the others, just add more see outs. So it is just going to calculate and that's it. It's getting it from total wage. Any question? Any questions so far? So if not, I can just review a few of other, let's say, mathematical process quickly with you because we already look at how to use them inside Visual Studio. In order to do, for example, division, we are doing it exactly the way that we do in math, right? So, for example, if you are going to see out, let's say 13 divided by 5, you simply write it down. Write it down the way you do in regular math, and so on. If you are going to subtract something, you already have like addition in here. Suppose that this is going to be subtraction. It's going to be exactly the same method. But if you are going to have, for example, some decimal point, definitely you have to also include the decimal point and then the division, something like that. Percentage is similar. Percentage, all you have to do, for example, you have to just use your shift and percentage sign, which is on top of number 5 in your keyboard to make it to become a percentage, and so on. The last part is the comments. I already explained how to comment. In order to comment, you have to add double a slash in front of any line to add any comments, like for example, add notes in here. Or if you want a line to completely become deactivated, just add double a slash at the beginning. That should be at the beginning. Multi-line, in case you are going to comment multi-line at the same time, either you have to add like double a slash to the beginning of all of them one by one, which is really time consuming, or a smarter method is start with just one single a slash, add a star, and then include as many lines as you want. Like for example, start from here, and then suppose that you are gonna close it in here, a star, a slash at here. So then all of this, like line 7 to line 12 at the same time, are going to be commented or deactivated. So this is going to save time. There are situations that we want to at the same time comment out maybe 20 line, 50 lines. So it's time consuming to do it one by one. So it's a slash start with a slash start and close with star a slash. Remember, I also added this one right in here for you. So start with slash start, close with star slash. This one I already explained it, and this one is the template. I already said what's the functionality of the brace or the curly bracket. These are the rest. I already explained all of them for you. So to close up, I'm gonna just practice one more program for you to calculate the, like a circle, to calculate just some aspect of a circle. So in this program, I'm gonna use some variable and I'm gonna use some constant. That's why I'm practicing this one with you. There are situations that you are going to use, like for example, pi. You know that pi is a constant number. Now, you guys are new. You have no idea how to define a constant number in C++ programming. In order to define any constant number, you have to go back to the beginning of the code the way that I do in here. Before main, and make sure after using namespace. This is mandatory. It must be before main, after using namespace. Because if you define your constant number before using namespace, you have to add a steady colon. But if you do it after, then you are good. You don't need any extra information. So you have to simply say hash define pi and then give the number, right? This is how you define your constant number of pi. Is there any other method? Yes. I will show you and teach you and train you with other methods as well in order to define your constant. But at this point, this is the easiest. Let's start with basic. Another one I want to define is diameter. So this is one way to, at the beginning of the main or before the main, define your constant numbers. Of course, you can also define them inside the function as variable if you want to as well. But pi is something known for the compiler. Since pi is known, that's why I don't need to define the variable. Since diameter is known, I don't need to define the I don't need to define it inside the function. The compiler understand them. They are already included in the compiler. That's the reason. So I'm gonna just print out the circuit, right? The circuit, then I have like the pi and I have the diameter. So if I just debug, now the very last thing that you learn is how to define a constant number. It must be before the main, after using namespace. And then I have the value to be just a product of pi and diameter, pi and diameter, which is 3.1 something times 10, 31.4159. So I'm going to pause right in here and we are going to have another few minutes of break and then we are going to start lab. So let me stop recording right in here. Meanwhile, I'm going to give you a break. I'll take care of your questions.